Layovers, your weekly dose of aviation innovation.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard from the flight deck. This is Paul Papadimitriou.
Hello everybody, this is Alex Hunter.
We'll be your pilots for this show about the news, the startups and the technologies defining the modern air travel experience. Our flight time today, 1 hour and 25 minutes, and we expect an on-time arrival. Coming up on this flight, Don Hunter, our guest, has been around the world from the Royal Air Force to Oman Air, from Cathay Pacific to managing Cathay Airport. We asked him about the huge operation that was a transfer of AKG, the future of flying in Africa, the lessons in accident readiness we can learn from Malaysian, and the recent Shoreham Air Show disaster. As we reach our cruising altitude, I'm going to turn off the fasten seatbelt sign for you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and let's turn on those noise-cancelling headphones.
Flight 22 to Joburg. Hi.
Hey Paul, how's it going?
Very good. I see you have a guest.
We have a
with
guest.
You.
We are very lucky to have someone who was the very experienced Chief Officer of Airport Operations for Oman Air most recently. Prior to that, MD, let's do the list. This is quite a long list, so get comfortable. MD of Dnata Philippines, Vice President of Operations for Dnata Dubai, Managing Director of Menzies Macau, General Manager Airport Services for Virgin Atlantic, from 86 to 2004 with Cathay Pacific, including running Cathay Airport, and possibly most importantly, my father.
I was about to say that.
Please welcome my dad, Don Hunter, to Layovers.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you for inviting me, Paul and Alex. I'm honored to be here.
Plus, thank you, because not only you're here, but yours have been listening to us almost since the beginning. So thank you so much. I hope we are up to your standards of when we talk about aviation.
Absolutely. No, I get a great buzz out of it, like many of your other listeners as well.
Well, thank you so much. So you've been doing all these things, so it's going to be a bit of a special episode in terms of we're still going to run with some of the stories that have been happening in the past few weeks. But at the same time, since you're here, we want to, of course, listen about the stories that you've had in your life about. I mean, for me, the Hong Kong airport transfer must be the one that I'm most fascinated about. But other as well, and probably as well, your perspective on how is the state of flying today and whether that leads us in the future. So maybe, Alex, do you want to start with that Hong Kong story? Because that's the one actually I really love about your dad.
Yeah. So that was what year? Embarrassing. But what year was it?
That was 1998.
1998. So moving Kai-Tak, which we've talked about in the past because I think it's an amazing airport, which was this, at the time, the world's busiest single airport runway. And not only that, it was a very difficult approach. And I think they finally realized that Hong Kong needed an airport to support its kind of financial standing in the world. So they built CLK, but one of the outstanding problems was then how do you turn one airport off and then the other one on without disrupting? So how did they do it?
Well, just backing up a little bit, Hong Kong Kai-Tak Airport was designed at maximum capacity to handle 13 million passengers a year. And at the close in 1998, it handled 31 million. So you can see how hugely stretched it was. It had a single runway, as you mentioned. It had a curfew from 6:30 in the morning until midnight. So there was quite a large period of time where no activity took place. And coupled with that, 75% of all passengers who got on and got off an airplane had to do it via bus. So it wasn't particularly friendly place to operate in and out of. And again, a very difficult approach. Mercifully, in all the years that it operated, there were very few major incidents. And all of those incidents happened in the runway that faced out towards the sea. If there'd been an aircraft accident, God forbid, that happened coming over Kowloon City, which is the most densely populated place on Earth, one hates to think what might have happened. Anyway, so the airport was hugely overused. And part of the agreement was that original agreement, because Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997, and the original agreement was that the airport would be completed by that date. But because of the vast technical issues. It wasn't. So the mainland Chinese agreed to an absolute 1 year maximum extension. So it was supposed to be the 1st of July, 1998. As it was, I think, the 7th of July. And so we had all of the operation literally closed down at midnight. The last aircraft left Kai Tak just after midnight, and then the first one came into CLK at 6 a.m. So logistically, it was a massive operation.
So did you have to move? Did you just leave a bunch of stuff at Kai Tak, or was there a bunch of equipment that somehow needed to get? Because they're not close, these airports.
32 kilometers distance.
So when you closed it down at midnight, and then the first flight arrived at 6, what had to happen in that 6 hours?
Well, the main thing was that the people moving issue was the least difficult one. Just instead of going to work at Kai Tak in the morning, you went to work 32 kilometers away, which proposed some administrative problems. But basically, the airport was full on at Kai Tak up until midnight. So all of the ground equipment, if you can imagine, all the pushback tractors, all the main deck loaders, lower deck loaders, baggage trolleys, you name it, had to be sent these 32 kilometers. Now, some of them went by barge through the harbor, but the majority went by road. And it was the classic, if it could go right, it did go right. It was the single largest peacetime movement of equipment ever.
Wow.
Wow. And it had to happen in that window of about 5 or 6 hours. Some equipment had been moved during the previous couple of days, but we were operating to maximum capacity right up until the close. So police were heavily involved, the government, road traffic people. A lot of road signs and lighting had to be taken down because of the size of the equipment that was being moved. And just logistically, where should it go to and what should it happen? And it was absolutely bizarre. I stayed overnight at Kai Tak Airport that night in the airport hotel, which overlooked the ramp and the runway. And it was absolutely eerie to pull the curtains back and look down, and there was no aircraft there, no equipment, no people, nothing, just almost tumbleweed blowing down the runway.
Wow.
But tell me, was the operation, I mean, obviously it was successful, but did you have any hiccups on the launch of the new airport at 6 a.m. that morning?
It was an absolute disaster. What had happened was, because of the pressure to open it on the 1st of July, which slipped a little bit, some of the systems hadn't been properly tried and tested. The flight information display system, the aircraft parking, most notably the baggage system, and it collapsed, almost with the arrival of the first wave of aircraft. At one point, there were 10,000 bags in a huge pile in the basement. On the cargo terminal side, there were massive hardware and software issues. And actually, at one point, you could smell the airport from about 10 kilometers away because of the rotting vegetables and stuff that had just piled up. So I'd be a liar if I said, yeah, it was smooth apart from a couple of glitches. It was a major problem, and it provoked a government inquiry into what absolutely went wrong. But Hong Kong's really good at getting back on its feet. The people of Hong Kong are very resilient. And within a very short period of time, the things that had gone badly wrong were put right. Cargo flowed through again. But those first 6 weeks, I would say, nobody got much sleep.
I mean, for those who are listening who don't know, Hong Kong is still, I think, the largest cargo airport in the world. So that must have been quite something to not having it work from day one.
Well, you can imagine the angst and the fury as well of the shippers and the people who were putting air cargo through that airport, because a lot of people relied on it for their living. Freight forwarders, manufacturers, people needing urgent medical and stuff like that. So the blood pressure of many people was high, and as you say, the largest tonnage of any airport in the world at that point, and I think probably still now.
I think it's still now. I think Memphis comes second. The other thing is, like, it's funny that you say about the luggage situation, because when Heathrow opened T5, I think it lasted for more than 6 weeks, that the luggage was not working properly. It was also a disaster, and it was not such as a big operation. But that's interesting you talk about the story, because and that's my next question. Do you share these lessons with other airports now in the world, you or other people? Because we know that, for instance, Mexico City will open a new airport and transfer in 5 years. Istanbul will open its new one in 2018. Of course, there might be also Dubai, which, I mean, might not close its current one, but might move part of the operation in the Al Maktoum one. Of course, the very long story about Berlin, Tegel is supposedly moving into a new airport that is never finished. I mean, is that something that, are the lessons learned that you are transfer there? Is there know-how that you can transfer to other airports operations in the world?
Yeah, I mean, they call it ORAT, Operational Readiness and Transfer. And when I was working in Oman, the new airport there is slated to open quite soon. And an ORAT team from Munich Airport, in fact, have been in place, will have been in place for 4.5 years, helping with that process. So people know that you can't sort of do it on the back of an envelope, this sort of logistical transfer. And so people like, from my certain experience, people like the Hong Kong Airport Authority and the airlines there, certainly Cathay, have always been very forthcoming with not with telling people what to do, but rather than, advising people on, you might want to think about this or whatever. And here are some of the pitfalls that you might fall into. So there's a great sharing of information. And there's now, with those airports you mentioned having either opened or opening, there's quite a lot of expertise out there in the marketplace. And there are companies like Munich Airport who actually make a business out of helping other airports with such transitions.
When you mentioned ORAT, is it an initiative that is done by the IATA, or is it something completely private?
No, it's ORAT. I think now is a fairly generic industry acronym.
Oh, it's okay.
And certainly IATA have a big group of people who can assist in that. But it's kind of, I'm sure that. There are many businesses, whether it's a warehouse or whether it's a port or whether it's a major manufacturing thing that's moving from one location to another. They may even call it ORAT as well. I don't know.
I suppose the airlines have a vested interest in the success of these transitions. So whatever they can do to share that knowledge is going to probably be beneficial to them in the long run as well.
One success was probably the transfer from the old Doha airport to the new Hamid International Airport. I mean, I think it was just 1 year ago, and it's been quite successful. I mean, probably the size of the operation wasn't obviously the size of the operations in Hong Kong, but it was quite successful. And they just reported the numbers of passengers, and I think it rose to almost 30 million. So maybe that's my next question, since we're in the Middle East already. How do you see this whole rise of these Middle Eastern carriers? Because that must have been something that wasn't the case like 30 years ago, but at the same time, they also kind of copied the mentality of Cathay and or Hong Kong in terms of having this kind of hub, creating a hub. How do you see all these new developments in the Middle East?
Well, the starter of all of them, I suppose, was Emirates. They started in 1985. And my previous boss at Oman Air was Peter Hill, was one of the founders, one of the four founders of Emirates back then. And they saw a niche geographically. They're very well positioned. They can capture the traffic, the long haul traffic and the regional traffic, but certainly the long haul Europe to Asia, Europe and to Australasia. Also, the UAE ruler, Sheikh Maktoum, was quite visionary when he figured that at some point the oil is going to run out and we better have plan B. And plan B was to develop Dubai in particular as a business center and a banking and transportation. And Emirates started with, I think, 1727. And now they've done a fantastic job. And of course, there's been a huge amount in the press about, they're subsidized and they get free fuel and all the rest of it, which is simply not true. And I think that debate is going to rage on. Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways have also one thing going for them as well. They're three very well-run airlines. They search globally for the best people in the various fields. And yes, there's a lot of rivalry amongst the Etihad, Qatar, and Emirates, but they found a niche market, and I think that they're taking that argument to the US, particularly when they say one of the arguments has been is, well, look, okay, you're complaining because we're serving too many places in the US, but I don't see the likes of American, United, and all the rest of it into all parts of Africa and India and many of the places we go to. So, I think I really take my hat off to those three airlines in particular for finding a niche market and really, really developing it well.
So you must have seen Dubai Airport at the very beginning, which was basically a hangar or something. There was nothing there, right?
There was nothing very much there at all, and even it's the world's greatest building site. Even as we talk, and some traffic has been sent down to Dubai World Airport, but Emirates have still not announced when they're going to make their major transition because they've invested so much money already into DXB, but they've added so many terminals, and anybody that's been through Dubai at 2:00 in the morning, you just think
absolutely
you can't cram any more people in. And they've been quite clever in the way they designed the terminal, and clever I put in parentheses because you're virtually forced to squeeze past all of the duty-free shops before you can get to your gate, which is good for sales and commissions, but not always good for the passenger. But no, it's incredible the development that they've done. And Qatar, indeed. Qatar Airways has a very driven managing director who really ran that timetable for the opening of the new airport with a very firm hand. And I went through the old airport a couple of years ago, and I'm very keen to go through the new one, which I haven't yet done.
Yeah, the old airport actually also was maybe not the story of Hong Kong, but it was also very crammed at the end because it was not planned to manage as many people. So I haven't been through the new one either, so I cannot tell you about. Have you, Alex, gone through?
No, I've never been to Qatar. Actually, I'd like to experience both the airport and the airline.
I've only been through the airport. I've never been to Qatar. So, it's the thing. Sometimes there's so many people that fly these Middle Eastern airlines for a reason, because they're very good quality. But more often than not, you hear people that have been through either Doha, Abu Dhabi, or Dubai, but they've just basically done a layover. They've actually never been to the city. Although, of course, Dubai now is becoming a destination by itself. And it's that's why I was asking the question about what it was 30 years ago, because when you look at the pictures, it was like nothing. And nowadays it's like completely insane. So, wow. So is it a model, because so you work in Asia a lot, of course, Hong Kong, and this model of hub and spoke. It's a model that now we hear other countries trying to replicate. So China is obviously an example, and it's too early, but we know that they are thinking of, of course, Hong Kong is in China nowadays, but they are thinking of developing other cities with a similar model. So do you think it's something that we'll see more and more? Will we see, basically the question is, will we see other Emirates being brought up either, I don't know, in Africa or in China?
Well, I think it will be. The major thing with somewhere like, the success of Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways is not taking people to Dubai. It's the big hub and spoke, and having it on the ends of those spokes, very large population masses. So there's not really a point in having a hub and spoke operation in Ethiopia, for example, where the population levels are very small. But Africa is particularly interesting. They've struggled with it. If you go back quite a number of years, there was an airline called Air Afrique. And Air Afrique was owned by, I think it was 7 of the West African nations, and underwritten by a lot of French know-how and so on. But ultimately it failed because too many other agenda, people borrowing aeroplanes for presidential visits and people not paying their bills and so on. But there've been a couple of attempts in Ghana, for example, to expand the airlines there, and Kenya Airways have done a very good job of hubbing and spoking. They had a long relationship with KLM, and some of the KLM management said, "Look, you've got a good location at Nairobi. You need to suck in traffic, all the trader traffic that goes on to China and Asia, bring them in from Central Africa, West Africa, hub them through Nairobi, and then squirt them out to wherever in Asia we can fly to. Now, KQ have had a very difficult last 12 months fiscally, but as a concept, the hub and spoke on the East Coast, hub and spoke on the West Coast is important. And I think that, a lot of people have been looking at Africa to see ways that they can get that level of success that's happened in the Middle East and, as you say, in China.
Actually, the level, if you look at the numbers, I think the projections are that the biggest growth in passenger traffic will be in Latin America first, but Africa will come second in the next 20 years. So it's actually a continent that will grow. And but it's true. I mean, you just mentioned that Kenya Airways had huge losses. There was this story, I don't know if Alex you remember, of that person who took a Air Zimbabwe aircraft and he was alone in the plane. So they were like going for an entire haul with a single passenger, which kind of is symbolic of maybe the state of very old-fashioned traditional airlines in Africa.
I reckon if you took away loyalty program redemption schemes, you would have quite a lot of empty airplanes in the U.S. as well.
Yeah, well, but not. I think that like your father just mentioned. I think the fact that people were using these airlines a bit as private, airlines because I'm a member of a government. I mean, there was a lot of mismanagement for a very long time. It still happens. I think only Ethiopian right now is having a good streak in terms of making money. They're actually raising their value, but there are also, interestingly, a lot of new low-cost airlines that are being created in Africa. That may be part of the solution for maybe at least intra-Africa travel. There was, I think, in Tanzania, there's one that is backed by EasyJet. I think it's called FastJet.
Yeah.
So do you guys think is also something that we'll see more and more in Africa, these very low-cost models?
It definitely seems like it's a very attractive investment market at the moment, that people are looking to come in alongside actually just alongside our head-to-head with the national carriers who, as all these articles have shown, are really struggling financially. They've got meddling interests and that type of thing. And so you've got people, I'm pretty sure that Tony Fernandez, who is the founder of AirAsia, has got an interest in Africa.
Well, have you guys heard of an airline called flyafrica.com?
I've heard the name. Yeah, I've not looked into it.
Okay, well, this is the CEO of flyafrica.com is a guy called Adrian Hamilton Mans, who has got a lot of experience and track record in low-cost carriers and so on. And they've started flying. You mentioned Zimbabwe. They're flying from Zimbabwe to Johannesburg. They're flying to Windhoek in Namibia. And they haven't been going for not even a year, I don't think. They're operating 737s. They have I think a genuinely low-cost airline mantra. And I think you're going to see more and more of those. Part of the problem of doing business in Africa is around traffic rights, is around just getting business done, wherein some of the African nations' experience in aviation matters and bilateral agreements and so on is limited, and so it really requires a lot of perseverance. But if you put flyafrica.com at the back of your mind and you Google it in a year and see how they've done, my guess is that they're seeking lots of other routes and countries to fly into as we speak. There have been a few failures in South Africa. There are too many low-cost carriers, probably. Nationwide went under, and there's a couple of others. And then you've got the dilemma of South African Airways. Do you have a main carrier? And then you have Mango, which is a low-cost carrier, kind of potentially eating into that market as well. Jury's out.
That's another thing that I've always wondered about with Africa. It seems like in the next 20 years, it's going to be an economic powerhouse. Is probably a little bit overstating it or a little ambitious, but it's certainly moving in the right direction. The Chinese have definitely seen the potential. They're throwing all kinds of investment and resource at it. And you probably are going to have on the back of that a growing middle class who have the ability and means to travel. Can the continent's infrastructure, both on the ground and in the air, and I think that Skyfaring book, Paul, that you and I have been raving about, Mark Van Vonhoeker's book, he does allude to, although he doesn't say it out loud as much, that there are concerns with some of the air traffic control infrastructure in some of these places, the quality of the airports and security and facility. Can it keep up with the interest and the growth?
Well, it raises a very important point. And in fact, I taught a course in Dubai last year. And it was talking to airport managers, not of airlines, but of business aviation, business jets. And Africa is seen by the charterers and the manufacturers of business aircraft as the number one growth area in the world. It's the place where more business jets are being sold. There's more demand right throughout. And then you look at some of the airports that these aircraft might fly into. And there are major concerns there. Some airports, and I was involved in a couple of them, like the South African ones prior to the 2010 World Cup, have really raised their game. They have some fantastic facilities. Some other countries that have been plagued by civil war, political strife, famine, whatever, have lagged way, way, way behind. Nairobi Airport, they've just now opened the new terminal, not quite in time for the old one to have been burnt down, but so they've invested a lot of money in there. But some of these airports are difficult anyway. If you look at Nairobi, if you look at Johannesburg, or they've got a built-in problem, which is they're at 6,000 feet altitude anyway.
So there's a problem with the payload an aircraft can land with on these airports.
Yeah. And take off with, just as importantly. I've taken off out of Joburg on a hot day, and it feels like you're going to drive to Hong Kong.
Yeah, but at the same time, this is maybe not solvable unless you move the airport out. But we'll talk about Joburg at the end. But the one interesting bit you said is about the landing rights. Is about probably also the lack of competition, because if an airline cannot land. Cannot have a landing slot in an airport, you simply cannot either create a low-cost airline or also open to competition from other parts of the world. And that's probably part of what's also keeping the continent behind some of the other emerging countries, not something that we see only in Africa, something that we see in other smaller Middle Eastern countries, or also in South America. And but then again, when you think about it, it's something that it's also a discussion we're seeing in Europe. With you mentioned about the subsidies, we had Amsterdam Airport is now refusing to offer more landing slots to Emirates, for instance. You also had I mentioned China earlier. I think United is struggling to add landing slots in Shanghai. As the same thing, because there's no true open sky. So basically, it's the countries can actually decide who gets competed, who gets not to compete. So don't you think that at the end, for Africa, since we're on that continent, a lot will happen when they actually also open the entire thing for competition? Yeah,
I do. And part of the problem is that if I'm in country X in Africa and I see an opportunity to fly daily into country Y may say, "No, I'm not going to let you come because actually I kind of might like to do that as well. So I'm going to block you." And the thing with the Middle East is it is fairly pure open skies. If you want to come in, and we've got a landing slot availability, not politically, but if it's physically possible to land, then come on in. But in some of the countries around the world, not uniquely Africa, there is a bit of defensiveness, which leads to that frustration, and ultimately it stifles growth. Some of the yields flying around Africa are very high. I remember flying from Johannesburg to Maun in Botswana. And the airfare was the same as flying Johannesburg-London. From Joburg to Maun was 2 hours, I think, 2.5 hours. So, the yield is there. It's just having the willingness to open up and develop infrastructure.
Well, talking about competition, the other thing that you must have seen in your life as working in aviation is that rise of the low cost everywhere. That's changed the game completely, no?
It has, and I think for the best part. I mean, people often say to me, particularly if I'm overseas, they say, "Well, are people like EasyJet and Ryanair and so on, are they safe? And I say the one thing that they are is safe because they have a very strong regulator, and the countries they operate into have extremely strong requirements in terms of engineering, flying, and so on. So absolutely. Could you say the same for Indonesia and places like that? No, you couldn't.
Absolutely. I used to live in the Philippines, and I was flying some of the local low-cost airlines. I'm not going to mention names here, but honestly, they would not be fit to fly in other countries.
No, I'm not a revenue management guru by any means, but I as I mentioned before, I do sometimes struggle with the concept of a legacy airline having a low-cost carrier tagged onto it. But it seems in some areas to work. That where it doesn't yet work, and even Michael O'Leary has stopped talking about it, is low cost long haul, because as Oasis Airlines in Hong Kong found out, they bought a couple of ex-Singapore Airlines 747s and tried to operate them Hong Kong, London, Gatwick, and Hong Kong, I think Vancouver. And you pay the same for the airplane. You pay the same virtually for the crew. You pay the same for the fuel. You pay for the same for overflight costs. The only thing you might not is food, which is such an infinitesimal portion. You pay the same for ground handling, and so it hasn't been a success. But I use low costs all the time because they're convenient. They fly to places I want, particularly in Europe, and I know that they're safe by anybody's standards.
Yeah, they are. I think Alex also flies them. I mean, we all fly them, and I think it democratized travel. I mean, I was at my dad's place this past weekend in Geneva, and we have these old family photo albums. And what they used to do, my parents used to actually put the boarding pass in the album, so I could check the price. And wow,
nice.
I mean, flying from I think it was a Geneva to Helsinki. There were I found two boarding passes. One was a direct, and another was through Frankfurt, so Lufthansa. The price were like actually at least 3 times what we pay today, and that's not even thinking about inflation. So nowadays I'm pretty happy to have EasyJet or Ryanair or all the others that we don't even talk about on this show, because like we said with Alex, every time we land in an airport in Europe, we find these new names we've never heard about. Yeah. So it's something that I think will, of course, also spur competition. But coming back to what I said, I think you have to open the landing slot. So maybe now a small question, because you kind of triggered my curiosity. How do you think? What's the state of flying in Europe? I know you're not working with Europe. You work mostly in Asia. But do you think the traditional airlines can compete with, on one side, the low cost, and on the other side, the Middle Eastern and other Hong Kong and Singaporean airlines?
I think they've got to compete on a number of levels. The Asian and Middle Eastern carriers have really raised the game in terms of product and customer service and modern fleets and so on. And within Europe and North America, I think that people expect it. If you get somebody that's traditionally flown on Air France a lot, and they suddenly go on Etihad or Cathay or somebody like that, or even from within the US, you suddenly think, hang on, this is much better. Generally, it's not always, but generally speaking, this is much better. Why can't they do this at home? The other thing is in terms of cost. I remember seeing that the highest unit cost, labor cost of an airline is SAS. And I can't remember the figures, but then right at the other end of the spectrum, you've got some of the low cost carriers. If you're a low cost carrier, if I fly on a low cost carrier, my expectation of product and customer service is zero. I'm paying not very much. My expectation is zero. My expectation of safety and on-time performance is high. If I'm flying on a legacy European or North American carrier, my expectation of both those things is very high. So you'd better deliver. And I think quite a few airlines go into denial and say, well, we've got the best schedule and we've got a better seat pitch and so on. But if you've got, grumpy check-in staff, grumpy cabin crew, and all the other things that can go wrong, then you need to fix it. It essentially comes down to cost, I think.
Yeah, people are very price sensitive. You actually told me, you just told my story because I used to fly Air France and long haul a lot. And one day I flew Emirates, and I was like, okay, so now I'm just gonna fly Emirates. I'm just regretting they're not doing more fifth freedom routes.
And some of these airlines missed opportunities. I'm not having an Air France bashing session by any manner of means. I know I've got a lot of friends in the airline, but I flew on an A380 from Johannesburg to Paris last year. My first time on an A380. Okay, I'm in economy. That's absolutely fine. That's what I paid for. That's what I got. But the seat was very uncomfortable. I mean, it wasn't to do with seat pitch necessarily, but the aircraft was 4 months old. They hadn't, taken the opportunity of saying, here is the blue ribbon of large aircraft now. My in-flight entertainment and that of all of the rows around me didn't work at all. So you just think, what do we do? What do we do about this? But I think legacy airlines do need to constantly look at what the passenger wants, not what they want to deliver, but what the passenger now expects, having flown on some of these leading airlines, as voted by people like Skytrax and so on.
I think actually that's like you mentioned. I still fly Air France and I still like them. Long haul, they're okay. Yep. I mean, they're more than okay. But they're I think what you mentioned is the right term. They're in denial. They still think that they have the right model. It's still the small feeder planes all go to Paris and then we fly around the world. It's just that people do not fly the same way, to the point that they stifle low cost competition in France because they just don't allow low cost airlines to fly into Charles de Gaulle and others. So there's a lot of Lufthansa, on the other hand, is trying on its end because they're like now saying, okay, we're going to do the German wings model. So pretty much all our short haul and medium haul will be handled by German wings, and the premium long haul flights to compete with the good products of the competition will be handled by Lufthansa. Maybe that's a model that will work. I hope for them.
Yeah, I think one of the other sort of sensitive areas that where some of these airlines are shooting themselves in the foot to a degree is to say, some of the unions will say, as we saw with Air France again and some of the other ones, you can start up a low-cost carrier if you like, but you're going to have to pay the pilots the same as a long haul. Well, it doesn't quite work like that.
No, it doesn't. Absolutely not.
And I think that's a dilemma. There's a place in the business for low-cost carriers. There's a place in the business for legacy full-service 3-4 cabin service. So there's a. I would not want to fly with EasyJet type amenities on a 15-hour sector. So
it's funny when I flew down to Geneva a couple of days ago, Paul. I was thinking I flew EasyJet, and they were very, very good. They were not on time, and it was a bit of a nightmare boarding. And we were on a bus, so actually, in retrospect, it was kind of crappy. But what I was thinking on the flight over there was, there's got to be room in the European market for someone who's going to go for, and I know you know what I'm going to say, a Virgin America model. Probably not with the seatback IFE, more with the Southwest streaming model. But Wi-Fi, streaming to your device, iPad, phone, computer, whatever, slightly less sell as EasyJet and Ryanair. As much as EasyJet has improved over the last 10 years, the constant sell of duty-free, food, whatever, Heathrow Express, Gatwick Express tickets is annoying. The fact that even on an 11 p.m. departure, they keep the full cabin lights on for the entire thing so that they can sell. It feels like if someone wanted to throw, and if you want to give me $100 million, I'll take a whack at it. I'll do it myself.
I would simply say maybe on that route, and I cannot just judge in all routes, but if you look at the London to Geneva route, I don't know how much you paid for your ticket on EasyJet, but I fly Swiss just because Swiss is generally only about 10 to 20% more expensive. I mean, again, if you book early enough. And I don't have to go to, for instance, Gatwick. So I also basically don't have to spend the money to go there. I just take the tube to Heathrow. I mean, it's the price differential is not that high, and you have a full service. Of course, there's no IFE, et cetera, et cetera. But so I don't think there's room, actually. That's my question. Yeah. Maybe by the time someone figures it out, EasyJet will have offered an in-flight Wi-Fi, and you can just have your iPad and stream whatever.
I would be amazed if
there is.
EasyJet didn't roll out Wi-Fi in the next 5 years. But and not to put words into your mouth, but I know that you're a big believer in the Richard Branson paraphrasing. You know, if you want to become a millionaire, the fastest way to do it is to be a billionaire and then start an airline. Why is the failure rate so high on new airlines? Is it non-industry people thinking they can solve the problems they don't understand? Is it?
I think there's a lot of that. There's some sort of drug in owning and running an airline. It's people think it's or some people think it's glamorous and
it's
whatever.
Glamorous, yeah.
And I think I can answer that with many years ago when I was working in San Francisco running a flight dispatch company. We did some work for an airline that had two DC-863s. And they operated them solely from San Francisco to Hawaii and LA to Hawaii. I can't remember. I think it was SFO, but it may have been Oakland. They lasted 11 months and then went bankrupt. And when the administrators came in to find out why it had gone belly up, leaving a lot of employees out of pocket, a lot of passengers stranded, they worked out that the break-even load factor was 117%. So basically, it was never going to make money. And I think where airlines often go wrong is they don't put enough value in revenue management, buying the very best revenue management talent that you can to understand the whole revenue management side. How to price your product, what it's really going to cost you. I mean, flying from Oasis, I think, and Cathay every day when they fly from Hong Kong to London, for example, some of the overflight costs of paying the air traffic control facilities at each of the countries you overfly, I think it's close to $25,000 per flight one way, just in. And if you miss out a line item like that, or if you say, it'll be all right, we'll be full from day one, or ground handling, that's a no cost item, and all the rest of it. I think people don't look at the numbers carefully enough, or they don't have enough cash flow. They don't have enough money in the bank ahead of time that they can burn.
Sustain losses at the beginning in order to actually create a business.
It's the same in any business, but even more exacerbated in an airline. And then, some airlines, like, for example, I was reading yesterday about an airline in UK that went bankrupt in the early 80s called Courtline. And they were very successful. They operated TriStars mainly and they went bankrupt for a number of reasons. One was the 1977 spike in oil prices. There were then some civil wars in places that they flew to on a very regular basis. And then there was a government put a sales tax, so a triple whammy, and it just took them out. That was bad luck. But I think the reason so many airlines do fail is not enough attention to detail to the revenue side.
We'll go to a failure in just a second, but because one of the other model has been actually sought after by traditional companies. I don't know if you've seen that. I think Delta is launching 5 different class of fares now. So you have like the absolute no frills, nothing, which is basically the equivalent of a low cost. Etihad themselves have just announced, I received the email, I think last week, have just announced 8 different type of fares. So of course it goes from the economy to like the ultra, crazy first class product that nobody can actually afford. So that's one of the models they're looking into. And interestingly, we mentioned many times Malaysian Airlines. We don't know the new names if they will have a new name. Malaysian Airlines is relaunching, and they've also talked about creating a modular product model, which is basically they're saying, you could fly business class, but you could say, okay, I'm going to fly business class, but I don't want to have access to the lounge, or I don't want to have our guests like fancy food, even though you just said that food was not, of course, a big cost. And they say they create. So Malaysian is one of the stories of an airline that had a very, very big issue. So what's your take of, of course, it's sad because it was not out of the control. They've been shut down and lost the plane, God knows where, but what's your take on the whole story of Malaysian Airlines?
I think that, I know Malaysian quite well. A good airline in terms of customer service and so on. part of the problem, perhaps unfairly or not, is rather too many fingers in the senior management pie, perhaps sometimes people being involved or politics getting in the way of running a good business. I think generally speaking, the industry would take the view that the old Malaysian was grossly overstaffed, way too many people to run it. It's sad because, I flew Malaysian 2 days after 370 disappeared. And everybody, as you would imagine, all the crew were in complete state of shock. And I've been flying Malaysian many, many years. The new CEO that's in there, Christoph Muller, he's got a huge task to do. And I'm sure the very first thing he said to the Prime Minister on down is, leave it alone. I've got to do this myself. If I need to fire 30-40% of the people, I'm going to have to do it. What it looks like, it's that may have happened. I think, Alex, you've read the article that came out yesterday.
Yeah, the new entity, which is called Malaysia Airlines Berhad, which is probably just an operating structure name, not the brand.
And the brand,
because the original airline was called Malaysia Airlines Systems. Has got an air operator certificate from the Malaysian, their equivalent of the DOT. So they have done what we all thought was going to happen, and they've restructured the legal entity. And I know that they've kind of cast off the old one to deal with all of the insurance claims and
the debt,
the debt and all of that stuff. And I know, like you mentioned, Christoph Muller's gone in there with a fairly substantial axe, and he's trimmed a lot of the surplus. He's ratcheted back.
They fired people, but at the same time, they seem to be regrouping into a more regional airline, not having the kind of size that they used to.
And there was initially this rumor that they were going to ditch all their A380s. That seems to have been pared back a little bit. I think they're going to hold on to a few of the flagship routes like KL London.
Who's gonna buy them anyway?
What, the 380s? Yeah, no, I can. That person is called no one.
Don, do you think there's a market for the refurbished A380? Do you think anyone will buy a secondhand A380?
I don't think so. But what I did see yesterday was an article in one of the aviation, maybe even Bloomberg, saying British Airways, other than getting rid of 4 of their 747s, are hanging on to the rest because they reckon that they've still got 10 years worth of airframe hours. By re-engineering a lot of it, they can keep them flying. No, I don't think anybody's going to be in the market for a used A380. But just going back to Malaysian, one of the crazy things that they've had to do, or crazy things that they got rid of, is they used to have a route, for example, that went Kuala Lumpur, Johannesburg, Cape Town, Sao Paulo back. And it with no traffic lights between Joburg and Cape Town. And it used to lose.
What?
No. And it operated for about 6 or 7 years, and it just hemorrhaged money. And nobody got rid of that because I think it was a political thing. Varig, you'll remember, they had one that went Tokyo, Hong Kong, Bangkok, Johannesburg, and then over to Rio or somewhere like that. And madness.
But this is almost like you said before. You said having an airline for a person is about glamour. Here, it's about a country having prestige. Like, we fly in all these countries and we have these crazy routes. And it was
the old Pan Am and TWA model, right? You could fly Pan Am from Berlin to Tripoli back in the day. And of course, that became hideously outmoded in the late 70s. But Varig and
but then again, Pan Am was, if I remember correctly, but Don, please correct me if I'm wrong, Pan Am was forbidden to do domestic. So they had to be very creative in what they could do outside of the US, right?
That's right. So what Pan Am did, they merged with the national airlines way back when. But I think the writing was already on the wall. It comes back down again to, for example, British Airways used to fly London, Joburg, Durban. But no traffic lights within South Africa. And they used to go London, Joburg, Cape Town. What they've done is they have a franchise down there called BA Comair. So they terminate everything in Joburg, and passengers then go down on a 737 or whatever. It's Singapore still does it. It's really bizarre. They fly Singapore, Joburg, Cape Town with a blinded sector, Joburg, Cape Town, but they're pretty smart on revenue management. So I think what Christoph Muller would have done on day one is taken a microscope to all of the routes and all of the profitability, all of the onflow of revenue from feeder routes, and just bin the ones that didn't make any sense.
I'll go back to Malaysia in a second, but I just want to have your take on, do you think the Fifth Freedom routes, for instance, I took Milan to New York with Emirates. So that was great, honestly. I was really relieved to fly them instead of flying one of the other crappy airlines, especially on this route from London to New York is extremely expensive. So do you think we're going to see more and more of these?
You know what? I don't know. That was a huge political fight to get that fifth freedom.
Obviously, yeah.
And a lot of people cried foul. Some people have tried to do it, I think, over Scandinavia. And in fact, I think they do it over Scandinavia. But I think that particular one was a bit of a one-off. And I'm not sure how many more countries will allow that sort of fifth freedom activity in their own backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, did you want to ask another question about the failure of MH to your dad?
Yeah, so Paul and I had been kicking this around, basically since this happened. And I think you've seen it on the inside, unfortunately, I guess. But what happens in an airline, and I guess to an extent at an airport, when something happens, be it an accident at the airport, and I think you were there for the Air China plane going off the end of the runway, and was it the Indonesian Hercules?
Yeah.
That went off the end of the runway, and then a few at CLK when the Mandarin Airlines MD-11 crashed during a typhoon. What happens?
Well, one of the things that I do now in my semi-retirement is I teach for IATA. And I'm very pleased and privileged to be able to give something back to the industry. And one of the courses I teach is emergency preparedness for both airlines and for airports. And of course, what happens is when something really, really bad happens is human nature says you freeze. And I take the example of the Asiana aircraft that crashed at San Francisco.
Oh, yeah, which we heard Dan talk about.
It happened at 11:30 on a Saturday morning, and part of the brief that I give, one of the modules is, okay, you are now going to be the station manager for Asiana at San Francisco on that Saturday morning. You're down at the end of the jet bridge waiting for the thing because somebody says it's on approach. So you go down with your arrivals agents down to the jet bridge, and then suddenly you look up and there's a pile of smoke, and somebody says, we've crashed. Now, I say to the people in the classroom, what would you do? And I never get an answer because you just freeze. And if you haven't got a plan, if you haven't got a call out idea, now it's Saturday, and for sure that the country manager's on the golf course, and there's not too many people at work immediately now. Suddenly you've got CNN with a microphone up your nose. You've got the airport authority yelling and screaming. You've got the police. You've got the fire. If you haven't got a plan, if you're not prepared, you are going to fail. And indeed, Asiana were fined $100,000 by the American government for failing to provide adequate help to meeters and greeters, for example.
So yeah, that's a great point. When you have an incident, either that's directly or indirectly related to the entity that you're working for, what do you tell people who are waiting to get onto that plane, the turnaround, or waiting to meet people, even if it's not a fatal disaster, if it's the runways blocked or something like Asiana's happened where mercifully only 2 people lost their lives? When do you start going, okay, we put up delayed and then canceled? And when do you start? What do you tell them?
The thing about this is you can't do it yourself. The Asiana guy would have been one of 3 people on duty from Asiana. So you're going to have to use the resources of a lot of other people at the airport, all the way from the chaplain, if it requires from that, from the airport authority, from everybody else. So somewhere in your plan, you should have all of that written down. What am I going to say and when and who's going to say it? And you better be singing out of the same hymn book, because if you're saying, no, it's nothing very much, and somebody else shows you a picture of a burning aeroplane on the runway, immediately you've lost credibility. But the thing that we say nowadays is, you'll remember, I say to the people on the course, in the old days, an aircraft has a crash at the end of the runway. What was the very first thing that the airline does? It goes up with a can of paint and paints out the logo on the tail and down the side of the aircraft. Well, how dumb is that? And now, in this day and age of immediate communication through Twitter and all the rest of it, you have to tell the truth. You have to tell the truth quickly. And not tell any fibs, because you not only are you going to get caught out, but you could be up for a lot of liability. So,
which reminds me, by the way, one of the heavy criticisms after the disappearance of MH370, but also after the shutting down of MH17, was a handling of communication. They might have not be told lies, but they were scrambling to say anything, which were, some of it was inventions, and then obviously then the public was not keen to them. So, like you said, either you tell the truth, or I guess you just say we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know is not a good. I
know, but what do you say then?
Well,
for MH370.
Yeah, for MH370, the thing with something of that magnitude is you've got to have somebody who is consistently the same person talking, and it's something like MH370. It's got to be the president of the airline or the country. Somebody who's got the ultimate clout. In something like the Asiana one, you're not going to have the president of the company because he's 12, 15 hours flying away. But whoever is speaking to the press, whoever is speaking to meeters and greeters or whatever, has to have had some training in what to say and how to say it, and so that they don't completely crack up. And they're going to have the right words, and to be told, don't fib, don't tell anything other than the truth. I mean, you can't say, yeah, well, I'm darn sure it was pilot error by the look at, you can't say that sort of thing.
No, of course not.
but what you can say is, look, there has been a major incident on the runway. It does involve our aircraft. I'm going to give you another briefing in 30 minutes. And 29 minutes later, you're giving the briefing. It's about that consistency of message, even if you haven't really got much to tell them, because you don't know either.
Is it something that basically airlines learn only when it happens? So now the airlines that have had recently a big incident, or sadly an accident, know how to handle this. The companies who have had a very clean record might not be trained for it.
Well, I think that's the reason IATA gets heavily involved in it. I mean, I must have instructed 400 or 500 people over the last couple of years from many airlines, many of whom have had a completely trouble-free time. But they recognize, they're not going to be told this is what you do in every circumstance. The book would be impossible to write, but here's the infrastructure. So, and I think airlines recognize that their whole reputation, their whole existence sometimes depends on how they react to an incident. It could be just a small one, something relatively small that puts the aircraft unserviceable overnight. Okay, well, you've got people.
United Airlines sleeping in army bases, I think, springs to mind immediately.
Yeah. So I think there's an awful lot of I know that there's an awful lot of training that does go on behind the scenes in helping people prepare, because the Don Hunter rule of aircraft accidents is that they always happen at the most inconvenient time, like 2:00 on a Friday morning or a Saturday morning, and nobody's around. It's you. You're the airport manager, and you better be prepared.
I was about to ask you, is there also a role for the airport itself? Because that's the airline, but what about the airport?
Yeah, it's a great accident example that I use happened in the 70s. In Sioux City, when a DC-10, United Airlines DC-10 had a massive engine breakup, and the aircraft crashed in Sioux City, which was the largest aircraft they ever had was 727s, but that was the closest they could get. Now, and they made a documentary of it, of what actually happened, and just about 6 months before, the airport, the hospitals, the city of Sioux City, everybody ran a couple of emergency scenarios, live scenarios. There was military on the base as well. The new airport director came in and said, okay, we've done that. That's tick in the box. Or at least his staff said, tick in the box, we've done that. And he said, no, it was unsatisfactory. We're going to run it again and again and again and again. They ran it about 6 or 7 times till he was satisfied. A couple of weeks later, what happens? They have massive fatalities, but a lot of people were saved because it was all joined up, not just people airside at the airport, but the local fire rescue, the police, the hospitals, the hotels, the chaplain. So response to any incident has to involve a huge number of external people. And you've got to exercise that. You've got to write it down. If you, for example, you say, as happened in the one Alex mentioned, the Mandarin Airlines one in Hong Kong, at the new airport, some of the fire engines went to the wrong crash gate. And
wow,
only a couple, but the majority got there to the right one. But if you hadn't told the external fire brigade where crash gate Bravo is, how would they know? So you have to involve everyone.
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, it's something that we don't think about more often than because, when we rate an airport, because I'm going to an article, it's more light, not about a disaster. When we rate an airport, we're not thinking about how ready they are in case of an incident usually we just rate them because we have a bad experience, a good experience. And the article I'm mentioning is, I don't know if you guys have seen it, is the Press Economics has done a different kind of rating. Usually the rating is the Skytrax, like every year we deliver awards to the best airport, usually Singapore, I think like 20 years in a row or something. Actually, Hong Kong is always very good as well, Incheon and Seoul as well. And this was done in a slightly different way, aggregating various opinions from people, reviews online, et cetera, et cetera. And he gave a slightly different type of ranking, though the best airport in the world is still Singapore Changi. The second is still Incheon and Seoul. The third is still Hong Kong International. But other airports have come through. And also they rate the worst airports at the worst major airports. Because, of course, you can always, when somebody says it's the worst airport, everyone has a history of a very small, tiny airport in the middle of nowhere that was really worse. But they only take the major ones. Of course, Charles de Gaulle, which is my worst airport, it ranks quite high on the worst list. Have you seen this list, Alex and Don?
I saw it last night, and I think there is a lot of bad data in this. I'm going to be controversial, and here's why I think that. You have, like you said, you've got the standard list of these are great airports. I agree with almost all of these. Delhi I've never been to, so I can't comment on. Helsinki's a great airport. KL, obviously fine. But then you go to the worst, and some of these are not major airports, and there are much, much worse airports out there in the world. I mean, Dalaman is the worst airport in the world? No freaking way. Sharm el-Sheikh, and here's my theory about this, and it's literally just an opinion I concocted over the last 30 seconds. These are low-cost, high-frequency, bucket and spade charter operation airports. The 1, 2, 3, 5, 6.
Yeah, so you have Luton there, which is in London.
Yeah,
London
and let's be. I don't know about those first few, but I know Luton and Stansted are cheap IKEA functional airports, but they're not as bad as LA. Okay, Newark's terrible, but. I think that this is people.
Charles de Gaulle. I'm insisting,
especially because the methodology for this was based on user reviews, and if you've ever read them, it's people like my fish and chips were too hot.
Plus, where I agree with you is that if we go back to the discussion we were having 20 minutes ago about the low cost versus traditional versus probably the Middle Eastern or Cathay. I mean, obviously in a low cost overall, if you compare with other low cost, it's fair. But if you compare it with a first class on a residence and Etihad, it's unfair. And it's true that Stansted and Luton in London, which are two examples close to home for us, Alex and May, are ones that are also introducing low cost systems. So you can have to. I think one of them, and I don't remember which one, even has you have to pay a fee for kiss and fly. So if you want to stay with your car for 5 minutes to say goodbye to your relatives or to your friends, I think you have to pay £2 or something. So they have this model. It might sound stupid or infuriating to a lot of people, but they admit we are a low-cost airport. This is how we make money. It's like being in an EasyJet. You want a sandwich, you have to pay for it. So maybe that's where I agree with you. I join you. You cannot compare, Seoul Incheon with Luton or Sharm el Sheikh.
I mean, I think the other thing is with some of these airports, and I think you're right about the bucket and spade influence there, but it's also to do with people. I'm absolutely on the same page as you, Paul, in terms of Charles de Gaulle. Whoever designed it.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything about that place is just hideous.
I think it's form over function. It's a beauty. The Terminal 2E, for instance, is beautiful in terms of architecture, but it's just beautiful in terms of they never thought there would be people inside. That's the whole problem with Charles de Gaulle.
And Terminal 1 is should be in a museum or something. But when I talk about people, I hate going to LAX. And the reason primarily is I always get into immigration at the same time as the rest of the free world. And by the time I get up to Mr. Grumpy at immigration there, you're already fed up. And then everybody, including the wheelchair pushers, seems to be in a bad mood the entire time. And that kind of rubs off. And nobody, I've never found anybody friendly at LAX.
That's true.
And I worked for a few years at Dulles, but that was a long time ago, so I can't comment. But Nairobi Airport, it's just changing now, but I would rate that as one of the worst airports in the world in terms of facilities and crowded. And I once needed to fax 2 sheets of paper from the airport, and there was a facility there where $21 per page, and you just think, wow. Hang on.
See, and a lot of these I get are bad airports. We've railed on them in past episodes. Madrid is one of the worst laid out airports in the world. But
it's too big. I mean, Terminal 4 doesn't make sense. You're one side is in Barcelona, the other side is in Madrid. You have to walk for 5 hours.
Miami, I bitched about in a couple of episodes ago. That's a terrible airport.
No, one I would agree, because I used to live there, is Manila, which in the worst airports by quality ranks at 16. They've seen some improvement, but it's, when it was raining, it was raining within Terminal 1 because, it was so old. It was overcrowded, built for 5 million passengers, had 25 at least. So it was, but I mean, again, it's a fun list to read.
I think it
will be controversial, but
if they'd weighted it by annual passengers, I think the list would have been a lot more accurate. You'd have Newark, LAX at the top, Miami.
But then again, when you look at the best overall ones, we can pretty much agree with, Singapore, Incheon, Hong Kong, Zurich. They are all fantastic airports so it kind of correlates with the awards and other. I mean, I do not trust awards because you never know how they run, but it's they kind of correlate with the story. Don, is there do you have you just mentioned you agree with me with Charles de Gaulle. So what's your favorite airport? If you had to name a favorite airport.
I think I'm with you on Changi, although Hong Kong was our home for a long time. It's just warmer in some ways. It's just slightly more friendlier, more a wider range of facilities and things like that. But I mean, you do have rags to riches stories, and certainly Johannesburg would be one that was absolutely hideous and has come back. But I think you're going to talk about that a bit later on. But I think Changi is right up there, and I like Narita as well because it's just kind of funky. Getting Heathrow up to number 16 as the best in the world. Maybe.
Honestly, Terminal 2 is really good.
I haven't seen it yet.
Terminal 5 is too big, but it's okay. That's a problem with these multi-terminal airports like JFK as well. I mean, you can have a great experience on one terminal and a very worryingly sad at another one. So, but I agree with you. It's the layout of this airport at Heathrow is kind of difficult. If you want to move from Terminal 4 to any of the two others, and you're you cannot do it. I'm going to switch a little bit subjects because we're running also, we could talk for hours. I know that one of the other things that you have in your very extended resume is you've been commissioned officer in the Royal Air Force. And you might have heard the sad story we had here in the UK, I think it was last week, where there was and I'm sorry guys, because that's your last name, a Hunter jet from the 1950s crashed over a highway, a motorway here in the UK during Air Force show. Have you seen the images?
Yeah, well, sadly we have.
So what do you think about presumably, we don't have, of course, any insight into why that happened. There's been some videos about apparently the jet, when it was taking off, slower than usual. But besides that, do you think, will there be a backlash against air shows? What are your general thoughts?
Well, I read an article a couple of days ago. There was a lot of stuff written and often very badly written in such wonderful publications as the Daily Mail, and but if you drill down to some facts, the fact of the matter is people like air shows. Last year, I think 6 million people went to air shows around UK, and that's a lot of people, and people like to the spectacle of it. They're very heavily regulated now. There was a very bad accident in 1952 at Farnborough when an aircraft broke up and killed quite a number of people. And it was flying over the crowd and it disintegrated. So those regulations have been tightened up. And I see that in the immediate aftermath of this Hunter crash, the Civil Aviation Authority and others have put on some restrictions. The one thing we will know is we will find out both why it crashed and why it crashed where it did. The UK Air Investigation Board, Accident Investigation Board, and the CAA are very robust at doing reviews of these. The aircraft itself is hugely robust and reliable, and we have a neighbor here in France who was a Hunter pilot. He actually got shot down in a Hunter in Oman when the Civil War was going on. And I asked him the same question, what do you think? And he said, I'm not even going to speculate. All I can say is, from what I've read about the pilot, he was extremely experienced, both on type and on fast jet and on commercial aircraft. But more than that, I know about as much as anybody else. And it's very sad. And I'm sure that there will be some, hopefully, short-term restrictions because, 11 people, not even on the airport, off airport.
Yeah,
is terrible.
that's the whole tragedy. It's just people, bystanders who were just running and, to work or something.
Yeah, so, it's a great shame. And it's not been a great year for air shows accidents. There's been one in Switzerland, I think, or Austria, day before yesterday.
There was in Switzerland a day or a few days after the ones in Shoreham. There was one in Switzerland where I think two planes collided in the skies. There was one in Austria, I think, as well. The problem is that it's just. I'm not going to be too pessimistic, but it happens. We have to make as much as we can to avoid those. By either regulation, of course, by having, but most of the time, not even most of the time, all the time, at least in Europe and Western countries, the pilots are very experienced. The planes have been checked thoroughly. So, incidents happen. I'm not saying that it's dismissively and we shouldn't do anything about Shoreham, because we will, and I'm sure there will be some inquiry and we will know what happens. But at the end of the day, you cannot completely live in a world where nothing happens ever.
No, people don't go to an air show to see an accident, far from it. But they go there to be entertained, and the same reason that they go to motor racing. It's fast, it's noisy, it's exciting, and with those things comes a degree of risk. If you nobody's going to go down and spend the weekend looking at an ATM machine in the high street, for their excitement. They're gonna, a lot of people like that sort of buzz, not to see people getting hurt, but to be thrilled. And sadly, it went wrong.
Alex, you attend a lot of these air shows, right?
Yeah, whenever I can, and I think My immediate thought was I went to the Reno Air Races about 9 years ago, which is a staggering spectacle. I mean, these are performance airplanes. There are a lot of them were of the Hawkers, of the Hunters vintage and older. A lot of them were Spitfires and P-51s. And there was a Formula One class, which was a lot of the L-39, the Czechoslovakian trainer. And it was incredible to see. And it was amazing that nothing ever happened. And then about 4 years ago, it did happen. And a plane that was racing had a catastrophic mechanical failure and crashed into the crowd and killed a lot of people. And there was nothing, no one could have predicted that. They could have had the course, miles away from the crowd. And I think something still would have eventually happened. But does that mean you should stop doing it? No, absolutely not. You learn, like my dad said, you don't fly over the crowd anymore. There's a safe distance between the flight line and the crowd. And the crowd never is ever flown over and that type of thing. And I think if you consider the number of flights per air show per year over the last 10 years, and you look at the accident rate, it's microscopic. And, given the risk.
And it doesn't only happen in these type of air shows. You remember, I think now it's 20 years ago, the Bourget, the Airbus, which crashed over the forest at the end of the Bourget. That was nothing. I mean, it was a professional air show like Farnborough here in the UK, but they also crashed. And, and we learned a lot about why did he crash? Why couldn't the pilot go pull over, and et cetera, et cetera. So we learned, not that we are happy that we learned that way, but we learned. Any other question, Alex, you want to ask your dad, or should we move to the airport as you wish?
Well, that was going to be my next question. So we talked about which airport should we feature this time, and I think we landed on Joburg because you were based there for 5 years. 5 years. So we haven't done any airport in Africa yet in the 22 shows that we've done. So we thought this was a good opportunity to talk about. Joburg. I will start by saying the first time I went to Johannesburg Airport. I'm still scarred by it. I don't think you get a story going in and out, but I did. When we were flying standby, as we did because we were airline brats, and we were bumped off, I think, 8 flights in a row, my brothers and I, trying to get from school back down to Cape Town. We bumped off 8 Johannesburg Cape Towns. We even got onto a South African Airways 747 SP, which is cool in of itself. And we were pushing back, and they started each of the engines up, and they started the third engine, and it didn't sound like the other ones when it started up. And the oil filter caught fire, so there was a really, really nice smell. We all had to get off the airplane pretty quickly. And then when we came back, they were doing major, major renovations on the airport, and it didn't have a roof on, and it was they had all this like draping. I don't know if you remember that. Coming down, it was the middle of the African summer, so it was 35 degrees, 10:30 at night, and the whole place was in no air conditioning. The whole place was in disarray. So I don't have massively fond memories of Johannesburg Airport. OR Tambo. What was it? So it's not always been called OR Tambo.
No, in the pre-Nelson Mandela, in fact, up until only about 8-10 years ago, it was Jan Smuts who was a South African patriot, just as Oliver Tambo is now. And I think people still call it, well, they used to call it Jan Smuts, but in fact, like everything else, Beijing was Peking for the longest time, and people said, it'll always be called Peking, but nobody remembers Peking anymore. So, no, it changed about, probably 8 to 10 years ago. But I first started going through there regularly in 2000, and I became the chairman of the Board of Airline Representatives, which is basically the airline body that lobbies with government. And it was in the lead up to the 2010 Soccer World Cup, and under which, just like the Olympics, the country that is successful in the bid has to undertake and guarantee a lot of infrastructure changes, not just in facilities and stadium, but in all the transport infrastructure. And my lion's share of my job for about 3 years was bullying government to deliver on. I wouldn't have been there. I left in 2004, and this was 6 years later. And everybody said, it'll never happen. This is Africa. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be a complete shambles. And so is the World Cup. Well, guess what? The World Cup was a great success. And
it was.
Both the two major airports, Cape Town and Johannesburg, were completely remodeled. I mean, it was a hideous place when I first started going there. You'd more than likely get off and get onto a bus. You get to immigration, and there might be two immigration officers there, and you'd sit there for hours. It was the baggage pilferage airport par excellence in the world. It's not without its problems now, but they had a vision, and the Airports Company of South Africa were well run and well led, and they realized that this was going to be the first showcase piece for South Africa people would see as they came into the country. And it's changed dramatically. I was just through there a while back, and through Cape Town a couple of months ago. On both airports, you get into immigration, walk down a modern air-conditioned jet bridge into immigration. Nearly all of the immigration booths are manned by people who know what they're doing, well trained. Baggage is almost always there when you walk through. There's great shopping both on arrivals and departures. There's a great infrastructure railway that takes you straight from the airport into Sandton and up to Pretoria and other locations. It's safe. To me, it's a real success, because when people talk about building stuff and doing stuff in Africa, they always say it's never going to happen. And a lot of people have got a lot of experience of it never happening, but here it did.
Yeah, it's just a parenthesis, because you mentioned the World Cup and the airport. We had Rio as an airport. In Rio, manning of the immigration is still a disaster. So I hope they learn from Joburg, because this is really like you still have to hold wooden boxes and not enough of them.
Yeah,
we mentioned earlier in the show that it was also a very high altitude airport, which is kind of rare for a big airport, right?
Yeah, I mean, Alex mentioned some interesting takeoffs. I always remember. Cathay used to operate 747s during the South African summer, and Airbuses, A340s during the winter. And the A340 on the cusp of summer, the performance was on the edge, and you'd watch the temperature ticking up. Joburg's at 5,760 feet, I think it is, and the departure was at 13:05, so right at the hottest time of the day. And you'd watch the temperature ticking up and up and up. And sometimes the aircraft would actually taxi back in and say, I either need the wind to pick up or the temperature to drop, because I can't go. And I can remember one day talking to the pilot, and off he goes down the runway, well within in limits, of course. And at the end of one of the runways is a golf course, and you could see dust swirls as he got airborne. And I sent him a message on what they call ACARS, so where you can send a message, teletext message up to the cockpit. And I said, that was just watch your takeoff, Captain. Pretty impressive. And he immediately came back and he said, "You should have seen the view from where I was sitting." So, but it's not without its there and Nairobi and some of the other high altitude airports are not without their challenges. And from time to time, we'd have to offload cargo to get the aircraft down to within takeoff weight limitations in the heat of the summer.
I think as well, I read somewhere now, I don't remember. I think the airport was used because of that reason by a lot of aircraft manufacturers to test their aircraft with such altitudes, including the Concorde. I think they actually flew the Concorde to see how it would react with thin air on a. Have you ever flown the Concorde, by the way?
Oh, when I was in Washington, I had the opportunity to fly it. It came and did a flag waving thing, and it took people up for a 3 or 4 hour flight, and they said, "Would you like to go?" And I was in the Royal Air Force then, and I said, "Yeah, I'd love to." And then one of my staff who'd done something really, really good, something outstanding, I thought, No, I'm going to give it to you. Give my seat to you because for sure I'll have another opportunity in my lifetime to fly Concorde. So he went off and came back and had a fantastic time, and I never did. So it was a shame. So I didn't. But they did take Concorde down to Johannesburg, as they did the A380 and probably every other.
I think so. Yeah,
every other large production aircraft.
I don't know if there's a regular route by the A380, Alex. I'm not sure, actually, to be honest. Maybe Emirates, actually, because Emirates.
Air France is.
Air France.
Air France is daily departure.
Because you sent me, Alex, the other day this tweet by Flight Radar 24 where they were showing, I think, all the A380s that were in the air, and basically more than half were Emirates. Or something, right?
It was 40 Emirates A380s airborne, 37 everybody else. It's staggering.
You gotta love that. I mean, without Emirates, no A380 will ever survive the program. Alex, sorry, I interrupted you within the airport. Anything else you want to add about the airport? Because I've honestly never been to that one, so I have a hard time.
No, I haven't been there in about 4 years. Last time I was there was for the Great Tech for Africa conference. So I should pay my respects to Joburg.
I would say to any of your, I don't work for the South African Tourist Board, but I would say to anybody that's never been to South Africa, is because of the strength of the dollar, euro, and pound against the rand, the strength of any currency against the rand, it makes it an extraordinarily cheap holiday. I mean, Cape Town was just recently announced by Mercer as one of the cheapest cities in the world to live in and go and visit. So go down there and see it. It won't cost you an arm and a leg, but it's an incredible country.
Wow. So I think we can wrap this one up. Don, that was great to have you. Honestly, we could have talked. We should do that another time. I know your son comes to visit, so because you have so many stories and insight, there were so many other questions I wanted to ask you, but we have also had listeners telling us that when we run over an hour and 30 minutes, they just stop listening. So I'd rather keep it down now. But really, thank you so much for all your insights.
My pleasure.
And that was really great. Thank you, Don.
Sure.
Thanks, Alex. And I guess, Alex, I'll see you next week.
See you next week. Safe travels.
On behalf of Layovers and the entire crew, we would like to thank you for joining us on this podcast today. And we're looking forward to seeing you on board again next week. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing.